You can see that, right? I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, there's my talk. All right, and I won't be able to see the chat during my talk, so I'll have to save all the questions for the end unless y'all want to say it out loud, because I can't see anything. So what I want to talk about in this session is about null safety, which is a very important topic as we keep migrating forward with Dart and Flutter, and has been causing a bit of confusion since its arrival earlier this year. And so I want to kind of clarify a few things. I have a couple of points I really want to draw out to make sure that people stop confusing one thing with the other, but we'll get there in a second. Because what is null safety? So null safety means that what the compiler is automatically writing code to check for this special null value. Now, we already had null safety for decades. No, not decades, well, part of a decade, as long as Dart has been around. So I'm going to call that in legacy Dart, and I'll explain that a little more in a minute. It's the initial value for all the variables, and for a lot of calculations and things, it's also a meta value. It's a value that's distinct from all the ints, but fits in a variable that will hold ints. It's a value that's distinct from all possible callbacks for a button, but it can fit in the same slot. And so it's typically used for something like this isn't present, like a callback, or none of the above, like I haven't initialized this variable yet. And as I just said, we've had it since day one of Dart. Null safety as a concept has always been around. And what happens is if you try to send a method to one of these null values, it throws an exception. And that's just going to say, can't do this on a null. You've probably seen that at least once or twice if you've been programming with Flutter for at least a day or two. I think it's the most frequent headline in Stack Overflow these days. What does this mean? Can't call square brackets on null. It's one of the really common ones. But this is really nothing different than the fact that any object that you try to call a method on it, try to call some sort of operation that it doesn't understand, it has to abort. It has to say, I can't do this. And so in the same way, null doesn't know anything. It rejects every single possible method that's thrown at it, except a couple of minor ones, but I'm not going to get into that. Now, why is this different from the very old days, way back when I started programming? And that is because in the old days, when you were dereferencing a null pointer, which is where the null variable name comes from, it actually set you off into unguarded memory, and all sorts of stupid stuff happened because of that. So this is a lot safer than that. At least when you do something wrong with null, you can still trap it as part of the try-catch mechanism, for example. So null is just a distinct value from all the other values, but fits wherever the other values fit. So let's then introduce what is non-null by default. NNBD is what it has been shortened to frequently. So if you see NNBD, that's what we're talking about. And that's modern Dart. So the Dart team spent many months, many years, I think it's at least over a year, bringing this into Dart. And part of the pressure for this was that other languages had null safety. I think in particular Rust and Kotlin and a few other things. And so we Dart users didn't want to be left behind, so we went ahead and all collectively brought this into the language. Now, Dart's null safety by default comes into play whenever you have your instance of Dart acting like version 2.12.0 or greater. Now, I'll explain more about what acting like means in a minute, but it's not inherent in the Dart version. You need the actual Dart 2.12.0 or greater as reported by Dart --version. You do need a Dart that's that late. and that's fairly recent in the last, well, in the last few months for most of you, but I've been running the dev version of Flutter for over a year, and I've had plenty of time to play with this. But for most of us, it was introduced at the Flutter Engage events release of Flutter 2.0 stable. So that Dart included with that release of Flutter is in fact the stable modern Dart, the one that understands 2.12.0 and what it means. Now, to contrast that, I'm going to talk about legacy Dart. Legacy Dart is just simply what we had before NNBD. In other words, what we've had since day one, essentially, of Dart. Okay, but it also could mean, depending on how you're using it, modern Dart, the Dart you download today, but in legacy mode. How do I mean that? Well, this is actually controlled for backwards compatibility purposes by looking at the pubspec.yaml for your project. And one of the first few lines is Dart dependency min SDK in a range of numbers. If you see in that line a number that starts with 2.12.0 or greater, then you're going to get modern Dart acting as modern Dart. But what most people don't seem to understand is we can have that min SDK as being under 2.12. My typical choice for that is 2.10 because that's the last Dart that came out before NNBD. So that gets all the other features prior to that. And no, I won't go into that. Fine. So we get legacy behavior if we have that pubspec be 2.10.0, for example. And that means you get legacy null safety, the same null safety that was working all the way back to the beginning of Dart time. And also legacy syntax, because Dart 2.12 and greater behavior introduces some new syntax that I'll mention in a minute or two. So again, I want to really drive this point home. Dart version reported by Dart -- version on your command line does not matter as long as it's greater than 2.12. What matters solely is the pubspec version. And again, it's important to understand this difference. And why am I beleaguering it? It's because I've seen so much confusion to this. So what is the difference between legacy Dart and modern Dart as far as we're using it? Modern Dart brings us some new language features. The required that had been formerly an annotation of @required, which is basically to say my optional named parameter isn't so optional. It really has to be in there or the call is rejected. The late function, I won't have time to really go into these, but there's a lot of good documentation and specs and all this stuff and how to use them. People have been doing some wonderful screencasts and Medium posts, things like that. So required and late and the null check operator of exclamation mark and the type annotation of question mark to indicate that a particular type is available as nullable rather than the new default, which is non-nullable. So those are the 4 language features that got added. If you ever try to take a modern null required piece of code and you type into legacy code, it's going to blow up on those 4 things, guaranteed. So these require the modern Dart working in modern Dart mode. It also brought in some functionality. In other words, when you have int in modern Dart, it means a non-nullable int. When you had int in legacy mode, it meant that, yes, you could shove a null directly into that, and in fact, it defaulted to that when you first created it. Okay? And it also brings in some compiler analysis. In other words, recognize how a null might make its way through your code. And so it's bringing to us these three features. But again, only if enabled in the pub spec. And here's this point one more time. And the only reason I'm saying it a lot is because I keep seeing every day somebody getting confused about this on all the places that I patrol to answer questions for people. Flutter 2 does not mandate using Dart 2.12. Your projects are safe. Please stop saying Flutter 2 broke my code. Most likely, you upgraded to Flutter 2, and then you went immediately right in and changed your pub spec YAML. Well, I also want to use the latest Dart. No, there's a path to that, and we're getting to that in a moment. So for installing Flutter 2, again, Flutter 2 does not require 2.12 Dart. Flutter 2 has fewer bugs. Flutter 2 has a few more features. Flutter has some renamed features, but again, they're only deprecated. They'll show up in your IDE as you better change this soon. They're not discontinued yet. There's no current plans to remove the things that are marked deprecated, but it is getting close. I don't have an actual date because Google can't tell me those things. It does give you an opportunity then, once you've installed Flutter 2 with your legacy project, it gives you the opportunity to migrate your code to modern Dart. But again, that is a separate step. You can install Flutter 2 and now Flutter 2.2 safely. That will not break anything. A few minor things, but ignore that. It won't break anything of significance. But migrating to null-safe modern Dart 2.12 and later is a separate step. And what you want to do is all of the following steps. Don't leave anything out. First, what you want to do is git commit. Get a copy of your existing code. Make sure you can always roll back to that. Then you can use Flutter upgrade to upgrade your Flutter to what will now be 2.2 if you do this today. And you're on the stable channel. If you're on the dev channels, you might get something like Flutter 2.3, which is what I'm running. But at this point, you can stop. You can simply use Flutter 2's features without changing any of your legacy code. So again, do not upgrade anything without the following steps. What you want to make sure is that if you want to take a particular project and move it forward to modern Dart, verify that the packages you receive or that you recursively use have null-safe versions. So everything that's listed in pubspec.yaml and everything they depend on all has to have null-safe versions. When a package author publishes his package, his or her package, to pub, they will declare a minimum specification, just like you can in your pub spec. And that will help the pub understand what things are already migrated. And the command for this is very simple. Presuming you're running Flutter 2.0 or later, I'm going to just say that presumption all the way through now. So you'll get this addition to the previous Dart pub command, Dart pub outdated mode equals null safety. This goes through and analyzes if we were to be null safe, if we were to already be migrated, which of these packages are available, which of these packages have newer versions, which of these packages don't have a null safe version. If you get that last item of information from doing this, stop. Talk more about that in a minute, but that's where you stop. Just running outdated doesn't do anything to you. It just lets you know if you can go on to the next step. And the next step is to upgrade your dependencies, which has all the risks of ever upgrading things. So I'll just put that again, maybe make another commit, just before this too. Git commits are cheap. Use them frequently. I do. So you run Dart pub upgrade, null safety, Dart pub get. And by the way, this is all listed in that URL. If you take away nothing else from this talk, take that URL. Okay. So once you've done this, it works out what your pub spec has to now look like, what your what packages you now depend on that are provided with null safety. This still might fail, even if the outdated command said everything was green light. I don't quite know the circumstances that make it do that. I don't want to spook you too much, but that still might fail. In which case, go get on one of the chat rooms and tell them what you did. Okay. Finally, you're going to need to upgrade your code. And this is done with Dart Migrate. Dart Migrate is a modern tool. It was added with the null-safe release of Dart. It didn't exist in earlier Dart commands. Migrate tool looks like this. It's going to handle most of the migration automatically. And what do I mean by migration? I mean, it will put in the question marks on all the types that need to be nullable to act like legacy Dart. It will put in some exclamation marks to show that we need to assert that this value is null before we continue. It will change all the @requireds to required, so you don't have to go through and edit that. And it does it not by just running crazy regular expressions over your code. It's using the Dart compiler and analyzer to figure out where those things go. So it's very, very accurate. It's completely supportive of that. It does this by throwing up a web server that you point your web browser at, and it'll give you the URL. You go there, and it's a nice user interface written in Flutter Web, by the way. A really nice user interface that shows you all the changes it proposes to make. It hasn't done anything yet. All the changes it wants to make, and you can click on any one of them and go and see why it's trying to migrate it for you, what it's trying to make the change. And you can select on a case-by-case basis, do this, ignore this, and the way it ignores it, it actually puts a comment in that if it's run again later, it knows, oh, I'm deliberately ignoring this, so it doesn't give you the same message twice. And my favorite button is way up in the upper right corner. It just says, apply all. Boom. Dart Migrate will never break your code that I've heard of yet. They'll never break your code, but it might make it less efficient than you might be able to make it if you did some smarts during the migration. That's why you should always review the changes it's suggesting. Yeah, again, this is going to show us what was selected and necessary. You can opt out of any change. You can even edit it. So you can go, oh, that doesn't need to be a exclamation mark. I just need to get this from a different source, or I need to check it earlier in the code because I need to know that for 3 or 4 things. Things like that. You can make smart decisions at this point. And what's great is just use your IDE to edit the file right in place, and then go back and hit a button that says refresh the files. And then the analyzer will go attack it again and figure out what you need to migrate again. At this point, you're done with the migration. You have qualified to be running on 2.12 or later. And what's great is that the analyzer, the Dart Migrate step, does this for you. It automatically changes your MinSDK with its blessing of approval, changing the MinSDK to 2.12. Do not do this by hand. This is how all those people got in trouble. And this is how I end up seeing this stuff on all the chat channels that I see. Don't change it yourself. You must run Dart Migrate. You must fix things. Well, hopefully I really slammed that point home. Y'all are going, why would we do that then? No, really, too many people have done it. Now, if in that outdated step, you see that you have packages that are not yet migrated, just wait. Wait, wait, wait. In other words, the world has to change first. But it's my personal rule, given how long Dart non-null safety, Dart NNBD, non-null by default, has been out now. If it's not null safe in the pub, it's abandoned. In other words, the original author no longer cares about this project. My guess. I'll probably offend a few people for whom this isn't true. But I would say with a broad sweeping stroke that if it's still not null safe today in the pub, it has been abandoned. Okay. And for that, you can either start by filing an issue, or maybe you see some people are already talking about the same issue. You can help them with that. You can start chatting with them in the issues tab on GitHub, if they're hosted on GitHub, like almost everything is these days. Except for the purists that all want GitLab instead. Go ahead, but I'm still using GitHub. So file an issue or help with an existing one. You can also, if you're in a hurry, you can fork the repo. There is a way of having a repo directly in your own directory by using appropriate paths in your PubSpec YAML to say, that's not the official one, this is the one that I have sitting over here in this directory. So there are ways to do that. There's even a way to have a GitHub URL. So if the fork has already been fixed and pushed, then I can still even refer to that as it is on GitHub, but my GitHub, not the original GitHub. Okay. When you do that, please help cooperate. Help everyone. Be sure to put in a pull request so that others can also identify and benefit from that. Now, if you don't want to do any of those, this has been done from time to time. Just switch to a different package. Rewrite your code while you're still in legacy mode to use a different package, or be prepared to migrate and update all at the same time. Good luck on that. But that's also a possibility. I've heard people do that there's an abandoned package from 2 or 3 years ago. Boy, that doesn't sound like a long time ago, but that's horrendously long in the Flutter world. And people have abandoned packages there, and people just write it using a different, more modern one. It can happen. So again, Flutter 2.2, which is probably the only Google I/O announcement I can make here, came out with Google I/O, and it was just a minor tweak. It still doesn't make it necessary to use modern Dart. That's still okay. There's nothing in Flutter 2.2 that requires Dart 2.12.0, so your legacy code will still work. Legacy projects can remain legacy, and there are some improvements, of course, as there always are, to the Flutter SDK. So it does more things, it has fewer bugs, we always hope, and so on. Now, there are currently in Flutter 2.0 and 2.2 some deprecations, things that will change eventually. They're still functional today, but I've been hearing some stories about how those deprecations will be being rolled away soon and just simply deleted. And so it's unclear when that happens. Again, Google can't announce forward-looking schedules, so even I'm out of the boat, even being a GDE, but still. So we have, so all I say is migrate soon. Okay, be sure to get to modern Dart as soon as you can, because you might have to get stuck on Flutter 2.2 or whatever the final version is that supports legacy Dart. And the one difference that was announced at Google I/O was that the Flutter create command, the command you use to build an empty template and you get to delete one more time that counter app. I've been claiming that the counter app has had more lines deleted from it than any production application has had added to it. It's really pretty crazy. All right, but Flutter Create now creates a project that initially starts as 2.12.0. If you look in the PubSpec, it already has that number. So we like to call this now, the new change is NNBD. It's non-null by default, It's still only a default though. If you go back in immediately after you type Flutter Create and make it 2.10 instead of 2.12, it'll still work. It'll still work with legacy mode. It'll work just fine. Actually, the main.dart might need a bit of editing, but it's still possible to do it. Just delete everything in main.dart and use your own code anyway. Okay, we're almost to the end. I got a couple of resources. Again, the official Dart migration guide mentioned earlier. There's a really great piece, I think it's by Bob Nystrom, on the Dart site about really understanding in depth what null-safety is for, why it's been introduced, what the implication of the syntax changes are, and so on. There was a talk on the null migration at Flutter Engage. This is the URL for that. I also have a channel, which this talk will actually go on pretty quick, but I do a lot of other things about Dart and Flutter there, so please subscribe. Apparently that's what they all say, so please subscribe. Vote me up, all that sort of stuff, right? But if you have more questions beyond what I'm going to be answering here today, go to flutter.dev/community. There's a community Discord, a Slack. There's ways to post to Stack Overflow. There's Reddit channels, subreddits. There's basically a lot of different ways to communicate. If you're not able to find somebody like me somewhere, you're not looking hard enough, because we're all over the place. And specifically, I'm on all of them. So it's very easy to find me. I'm like 18 hours a day off and on. So I can't even name hours anymore, but it's easy to find me. So that's what I have. And if you've got questions, and especially if you had questions while we were going, I can take those now. I just need to pop this out here and stop sharing. There we go. And I'm back. So what do we have any questions while I was gone here? Let's see. Nope. Okay. You're typing madly. Are you talking to me too? Am I just not hearing you? Oh.
Yes, I was typing a question was sent to me.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So what do you recommend for beginners in Flutter? How they start? Okay.
You mean, do I recommend Flutter for beginners, or what do I recommend people do to learn Flutter?
Yes, to get started.
Okay. First thing to do, and I'm gonna insist on this. People keep trying to skip this part. You've got to know Dart. You absolutely should, at least as a minimum, read the Dart tour. These are both on dart.dev, and at least skim the Dart libraries tour. You've got to know the basics of the language before you go even further. The Dart tour should take you no more than an hour to read at most, and you'll learn a lot. Especially get to leverage off of anything else you know about other languages like Java or JavaScript or anything like that. So please, please first read the Dart tour completely. There are some Dart code labs that I would consider somewhat optional, but if you really want to get that honed in. Also at the Dart level, if you Google for, or Bing for, no, I shouldn't say that here, sorry. But if you do Google for videos that say Dart tutorial, there are a number of good ones, but I'll give you the caveat. Anything older than 6 months will not include anything about non-null by default, and are almost at that point then outdated. Be careful. Always look at the pub date of everything you watch about Dart, because things move so fast. I would say that also about Flutter. If you're watching videos that are more than 6 months old, probably questionable, because the landscape is changing really fast. Anyway, after you get Dart sort of at a core, then go up and look at Flutter things. Flutter.dev has some introductory material that is really good, so you read through that. The next thing I would strongly recommend on the Flutter side is you read through the code labs and do the ones that you want to do. They're all hands-on. And also read through at least the titles, excuse me. Read through at least the titles of the cookbook the cookbook for Flutter is amazing. About 50 different tasks defined by what you'd have to do to make them work. Very, very important, because you are certainly going to do in your first week of Flutter programming at least 4 of those. And it will be good to have those at least like, oh yeah, I remember somewhere about handling a form and validating everything. Yeah, that's one of the cookbook entries. So you'll immediately be able to pop that up. So read at least the titles of the cookbook stuff. Also, if you've got some more time, one of the most critical things about Flutter is understanding layout. So being able to figure out when would I need a row, when would I need a column, all that sort of stuff. The whole section on the Flutter, Flutter.dev, this is all on Flutter.dev, a whole section of it is all about just the layout widgets. Very, very important. And then similar to Googling for videos for Dart, same thing with Flutter. Google for Flutter tutorial. Again, be wary of anything that's older than 6 months or a year, simply because non-null by default changed the things like required syntax, which really makes a difference sometimes when you have to give a parameter to, that used to be an optional parameter, and how we deal with nulls on the interfaces, things like that. So that's sort of the basic learning path I would take. You know, start with Dart, start with the Dart tour, go to the Dart library tour, read the other descriptive information there, then come over to Flutter, read go through and at least surface the Flutter front materials, look at the cookbook, at least for the titles, the code labs if you have time, and you'll be, and in the videos from both of those categories, you'll be, there's so much great videos out there. It's why I don't have very many. My videos tend to be about anything I see the same question 3 times for in a week. So I'm basically the FAQ answerer. And that's one of the things that are my channel these days, is things I refer to. For example, we were seeing a really common problem with people building feature builders and stream builders incorrectly, even a way that the actual documentation said, don't do it this way. So I illustrated with a video. That video has been referenced like thousands of times already, simply because it solves that common problem, and I appreciate that I am able to do that.
Yeah, it is interesting channel. I sometimes also do watch on it, and we are really helpful with your information. And thank you very much for your session today. So if anyone also have question to ask directly, Randall.
That was actually the first time I presented that talk, so, and I wrote it earlier this morning.
Yeah.
just in time sliding. Yeah.
So Randall, how we can do you have? Can you send us your email? So if you have any question, we can contact you. If you don't mind, of course.
I would prefer, as I said in the last slide of the talk, go to flutter.com/community.
Yes, yeah.
Flutter.dev, sorry, flutter.dev/community. I am every one of those places. If I'm able and awake and I'm not working intensely for a client, I'm there and I'm answering things. So that's going to be the best way. It's also handy if you ask it that way, in that you're not waiting for my time to turn the question around and give you an answer. You can get questions immediately. I don't have to be the guy answering the questions. So please do that. I mean, my email address is on my Wikipedia page, so it's not like I'm hiding anything, but I think I prefer incoming questions come in through one of the chat channels. Or post on Stack Overflow or Reddit. Like I said, I read everything.
Yes. Okay, so thank you.
And this slide deck, I should publish. I'm going to publish this slide deck probably on SlideShare almost immediately. And that way you'll get the URLs back again. But mostly I found them the same way you could find them, which is, Google for Dart migration, Google for null-safety, in particular, looking at the links that show up on Dart.dev for both of those, and you'll find that stuff right away. So it's not like let's just say Google has great SEO for their own websites.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. So, but I'll be publishing this slide set probably later this weekend to my channel. So subscribe to the channel too.
Yes, I will send you the recording of this session too.
Well, yeah, but I probably have some nuances I want to put in anyway.
If you wish.
And this is first delivery. Second delivery is going to be slightly different. That's the way it works.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
I'll stick around for a while in case anybody else has any other questions. So, thanks for having me, especially.
Yes, we
appreciate
are
that.
thankful for having you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So we take break 2 minutes to start a quiz.